Chapter 8. It's almost never too late. Eradicate regret. Non. Genie regret reen. No, I regret nothing. Edith Piaf. As children learn good manners, as young men learn to control the passions. In middle age, be just. In old age, give good advice. Then, die without regret. Inscription of Delphic Maxims, ad iconum. At your end, be without sorrow. Delphic Maxim 147. Looking back at your life, are there things that you regret? Do you regret actions that you took or actions that you didn't take? Regret can eat away at our sense of inner peace. The ancient Greek concept of ataraxia refers to a state free from inner turmoil, to tranquility and calmness of the mind. It was a goal of Epicurean and Stoic philosophy. A mind tormented by regret cannot achieve tranquility. Unhappy, intrusive thoughts manifested in conditions like obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, can lead to substantial cognitive and emotional turmoil. Sometimes the thoughts are endless ruminations based on paranoid fears. For example, such a ruminative thought might be, because of what I said at last, imbecile. In an attempt to alleviate this worry, an OCD sufferer might repeatedly seek confirmation from party attendees that he didn't in fact make a fool of himself. In this, he is like the stereotypical OCD individual who washes his hands incessantly because of a disproportionate fear of germs. Through such repetitive rituals of hand washing or seeking reassurance, OCD individuals hope that germs or intrusive negative thoughts can be washed away, literally or figuratively. Obviously, not all ruminations on one's actions or inactions lead to dysfunctional outcomes. But for an OCD sufferer, these unpleasantly intrusive thoughts come with an overwhelming intensity and frequency. Regret, however, is one form of existential rumination that many individuals have, revisiting past actions or inactions with a sense of sorrow. While many of the early studies of regret were conducted in the fields of economics, psychology, and marketing, more recent works have examined the neuronal and physiological signatures of regret. For example, older individuals who experience greater regret intensity have increased morning cortisol, stress response hormone, secretion, and worse physical symptoms. Furthermore, as people age and possess fewer opportunities to address sources of regret, they exhibit various negative downstream effects, including an increased likelihood of experiencing depression, as reported in this neuroscientific exploration of regret. The lack of an age-adapted management of regret experiences may thus represent a risk factor for highly prevalent late-life depression. Disengagement from regret experiences at a point of life where the opportunities to undo regrettable behavior are limited may be a protective strategy to maintain emotional well-being, and thus can be seen as a resilience factor. The bottom line is that regret not only affects our ability to achieve ataraxia, but it can also have a deleterious effect on our physiological and physical health, as well as our psychological adjustment, such as depression scores and life satisfaction. There are endless occasions in which we experience regret from mundane daily contexts. I regret having had a dessert after this heavy meal. Two grand existential forms of regret. I regret that I was an absent parent, or I regret that I never pursued my dream of being a pediatrician. If you can look back on your life and think of few, if any, existential regrets, then you will likely be happy and have lived a good life. At this stage of my life, I do have a few regrets, but I'm unsure I could have changed what actually happened anyway. By far my greatest regret is that I was unable to pursue a professional soccer career. I suffered a terrible injury in the U18, under age 18, Eastern Canadian Championship. My club had been crowned champions of Quebec, and we were competing against the champions of Ontario and the Maritime Provinces. It was a round-robin tournament that began with my team playing against the Ontario champions. We lost that game 2-0, but I had played extraordinarily well, and the Maritime champions were sure to focus on me next time we played them. Just before that match, my coach advised me to be careful and to get rid of the ball quickly. I was the team playmaker and nearly always played the right passes, so I asked him why he was so concerned. He said that our opponents would be coming hard after me, and I needed to be aware. The opposing player man marking me looked to be 35 years old, and he kept brutalizing me throughout the game. Finally, just as I had entered the opposing team's 18-yard box, with the chance of either taking a shot or crossing the ball, the butcher in question tackled me from behind, using the extraordinarily dangerous scissors tackle. This is when a player slides behind you and swings his two legs in a scissors motion. If he catches your leg, he can break it. He caught my leg, and the rest is history. The referee did not even whistle a foul, perhaps thinking that I was faking an injury to have a penalty kick called in my favor. The play went on as I lay on the ground with a shattered leg. It was the opposing goalie who came up to me, saw my pain, and quickly urged the referee to stop the game. I was carried away in an ambulance to a local hospital, where the attending physicians underdiagnosed the severity of my injury. Upon returning to Montreal, my leg looked wrong. The swelling was not subsiding, and I was unable to put any weight on my leg. An orthopedic surgeon saw me, and the news was not good. When I asked him how long it would take for me to play again, he said, "Forget about playing again. Let's hope that you don't walk with a limp for the rest of your life." I ended up having a closed reduction on my ankle, resetting of the bones without needing to have an open surgery. But the damage was severe. While I did return to some playing, I was one of 3 rookies to make the nationally ranked McGill University team in 1984 before I quit to focus on my studies. My competitive career was effectively over. I had hoped to make the Canadian national team. I had played for the Quebec team and had become vice champion of Canada, and there were opportunities to pursue a professional soccer career in Europe. But my severe injury, the fact that my family did not support my soccer ambitions, and the additional fact that I lived in Canada, hardly a hotbed for European scouts back in the early 1980s, made it easy to accept the career-ending diagnosis and retire, notwithstanding all these obstacles. I regret that I did not simply pack my bags and move to Europe to at least give it a full attempt. My biggest talent in life was playing soccer, and as Robert De Niro's character in A Bronx Tale reminded his son, remember, the saddest thing in life is wasted talent. You could have all the talent in the world, but if you don't do the right thing, then nothing happens. But when you do right, guess what? Good things happen. Every 4 years, the World Cup of Soccer rolls around, and I'm consumed with overwhelming feelings of regret. Did I waste my soccer talent? This is an existential regret that will always haunt me. Luckily, I was very talented in another domain, academics. I had always planned on becoming a professional soccer player, and then eventually a professor, so the career-ending soccer injury accelerated the timeline for my second objective. For the most part, I have nothing to regret professionally. My research productivity and prominence within the public sphere are sizable. Yet, I do have one looming regret. I have always had a deep desire to permanently relocate to Southern California. I've been going to SoCal regularly since 1985, including having lived there from 2001 to 2003 as a visiting professor at UC Irvine. I know, with every fiber in my body, that I would be maximally happy and fulfilled in the SoCal climate, which agrees with my Lebanese blood. And yet, I have made certain professional decisions that have greatly minimized, if not fully eradicated, the prospects of being offered a professorship there. I never played the expected game in academia, namely to become an obscure specialist and publish only in the leading acceptable journals. As I mentioned earlier, I am an intellectual variety seeker, publishing scientific papers in many disciplines, and in a wide range of academic journals, and such behavior is frowned upon by other academics, and thus by college administrators. Furthermore, I never like to network at academic conferences. I am a very sociable and extroverted person, but I despise interacting with people for real or imagined ulterior motives. I am authentic to a fault. Finally, my maladaptive perfectionism and my belief that few people could adhere to my brutally exacting ethical and professional standards has caused me to avoid building large networks of collaborators, which is another part of the academic game. Many scientific endeavors require collaborative teams, but I have largely foregone these opportunities. By being an intellectual variety seeker, an anti-networker, and a maladaptive perfectionist, I have pleased myself as a researcher and academic, but also made it difficult for other academics to support my candidacy for a professorship at their school. They might admire my professional CV, but I do not fit the expected mold of the stay-in-your-lane academic. And it is also true that my popular celebrity and my well-founded but politically incorrect opinions are not approved by the progressives who like to dictate who is hired at universities. I regret that I was unable to better navigate the tensions between my personhood, my desire to live in SoCal, and the careerist expectations required of a modern-day academic. Then again, my non-modulation is precisely what garnered me great success, well beyond what the typical academic career might engender, so perhaps my regret is misguided. But if any Southern California university is looking for a top-notch business school professor, I am here. 2 sources of regret: actions versus inactions. The psychological study of regret makes a distinction between regret based on actions and regrets that stem from inactions. Dr. Tom Gilovich, my former professor at Cornell, was a pioneer in studying these contrasting regrets. Most people, he discovered, consider their greatest regret to be one of inaction, such as, "I regret that I never went to art school." This insight was also arrived at by the American author Henry Wilson Allen. Will Henry was one of his pseudonyms when he famously stated, "Fools live to regret their words, actions, wise men to regret their silence." Inactions. Here is part of the Anglican morning prayer, General Confession, which speaks perfectly to the work of Jilovich on regret. We have left undone those things which we ought to have done, and we have done those things which we ought not to have done, and there is no health in us. There's another distinction to make, and this is between short-term and long-term regret. In the short term, one is more likely to regret certain actions, but in the long term, such as reflecting on one's lifetime, it is regret over inactions that dominate. Research showing the dominance of long-term regret over inaction has been replicated across several distinct cultures, including in China, Japan, and Russia. Even though cultures vary in the manner by which they construe time, regret due to inaction over the long term appears to be a universal phenomenon. Are there elements of regret that do vary cross-culturally? Intrapersonal regret dominates in the United States, regret of an outcome that affects oneself, whereas in Taiwan, interpersonal regret looms larger, regret of an outcome that affects another. This is perhaps not surprising when one recognizes that the United States is an individualistic society, whereas Taiwan is a collectivistic one. At least one domain of regret is rooted in a clear evolutionary calculus. If you were to ask men and women whether they regret having missed a sexual opportunity, inaction versus having had a sexual encounter, action, a clear sex difference emerges. Since the benefits and costs of mating are different for the two sexes, women's greater choosiness is such that sexual actions loom larger in their regret calculus, whereas sexual inactions loom larger for men. Hence, when militant feminists in the 1960s and 1970s argued that liberated women should engage in meaningless one-night stands to be equal with men, they were pushing against evolutionary reality. Feminists argued, falsely, that women were no different from men. And from that false premise, they went on to say that women should not be subject to the so-called double standard that tolerated promiscuity in men, but insisted on chastity in women. That double standard, so far as it existed, was, however, a mere acceptance of evolutionary reality. The idea pathogen known as militant feminism and doing away with that double standard and encouraging female promiscuity pushed many women into a life of unhappiness and sexual regret, near death, and deathbed regrets. One's looming mortality has a way of crystallizing the important things in life. There are many testimonies from people near death saying that they experienced a slow-motion replay of important life events. The old phrase, "I saw my life flashing before my eyes," is based on human experience. Albert von St. Gallenheim, a Swiss geologist and mountaineer, was an early researcher into the science of near-death experiences in the late 19th century, studying accounts of mountaineers suffering near fatal falls, including his own. Near-death experiences have been documented across a broad range of cultural traditions and eras, one phenomenon of which is indeed the life review experience, life flashing before one's eyes. Not surprisingly, one would expect that the images that flash before our eyes are not of our favorite material possessions, the Ferrari or the spacious 50 square foot house or the collection of high heels, but of the most important people and events in our lives. 3 Israeli scientists recently conducted both a qualitative and quantitative analysis of life experience reviews and found that regret was a common theme. In other words, as individuals face the imminent end of their lives, regret is a common lens from which to evaluate one's life. Whereas near-death experiences typically occur as the result of a cataclysmic event, like a heart attack or a fall, palliative patients have a somewhat longer window from which to evaluate their lives. Ronnie Ware worked as a palliative nurse, caring for people in the last stages of life. She recorded the top 5 regrets that people shared with her on their deathbeds. They are: 1. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. 2. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. 3. I wish I'd have the courage to express my feelings. 4. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. 5. I wish I had let myself be happier. While all 5 regrets are deeply instructive, I shall focus on regrets 1 and 5 for now. The 5th regret is all-encompassing, in that our control, at least partially so. When we allow ourselves to be mired in endless negative bile, especially on issues that are out of our control, we need to return to the Stoic Epictetus and heed his timeless advice. There is only one way to happiness, and that is to cease worrying about things which are beyond the power of our will. Take charge of your life, and do not worry about what you can't control. Don't regret having not been happy. Make sure to change this reality today. The first regret listed above is arguably the most profound one, in that it speaks to existential authenticity. Imagine the number of people who wake up one day to recognize that they have lived a false life. As a teenager, I remember watching the 1982 film, Making Love, starring Kate Jackson, Michael Ontkein, and Harry Hamlin. The plot follows a supposedly happy and successful couple who eventually divorce as the husband comes to terms with his homosexuality. I recall feeling a deep melancholy when watching the movie, realizing that the unnecessary pain felt by the otherwise loving couple could have been avoided had the husband lived his authentic self. What was true in that dramatic circumstance can be true in an endless variety of ways. Authenticity is protection against existential regret. Because truth and freedom are the two driving ideals of my life, there are few personal traits that I despise more than inauthenticity. Inauthentic people embody falsehoods and tell many lies, and this violates my love for truth. An authentic person has only one script to remember, the one that corresponds to his true self, and this he can live freely and honestly. When I watch Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris in their public lives, I am struck by the extent to which they exude an aura of falsity. There is nothing natural about them. Everything is strained, fake, and phony. This is sinister on multiple levels. It signals to the world that the fraudster is unsure about her real self, and as such, she must constantly construct a new personhood for the situation at hand. Who could forget the false accents that Hillary Clinton would affect as a function of the audience that she was addressing? Or the cackling of Kamala Harris whenever she is asked an uncomfortable question? Or her infamously bizarre interaction with children, some of whom were child actors, about the wonders of space research. She advised them that one could see the craters of the moon with their own eyes. Wow, so I can see the moon, the stars, and the sun simply by looking up at the sky and staring at these cosmic realities with my own eyes. Wondrous. I would much rather interact with an authentic person whose character traits I might find disagreeable, like Donald Trump, than an inauthentic person who reeks of duplicity, but is otherwise nice, like Kamala Harris. Authentic people are honest with themselves and with those around them. They navigate the world with a honey badger's, I don't give a fuck attitude. Authentic people never equivocate on their positions to please or placate the crowd. Instead, they tell it like it is, whilst being unconcerned about how others might view them. Authentic people are confident, in part because they are honest. They are comfortable in their own skin, because they do not desire to dissimulate. They do not pretend to be someone other than themselves. Under pressure, they do not assume the fetal position or prevaricate. They do not sit on the fence when a decision has to be made. They do what they think is right, work to achieve a good result, and accept that they have agency to shape their own lives. Hence, they are much more likely to be happy individuals. A central feature of personal authenticity is realness or genuineness. One is real if there is congruency between one's internal feelings and overt behaviors, even if such genuineness yields negative personal or social outcomes. While being real can, at times, carry negative consequences, this form of personal authenticity is associated with greater psychological health and well-being across a broad range of measures. Being authentic is negatively correlated with neuroticism and depression, but positively correlated with agreeableness and conscientiousness. If you are true to your personhood, you minimize the chances of future regret, for you have removed any incongruity between your internal thoughts and feelings and your external actions. It is perhaps not surprising, then, that authenticity is correlated with life satisfaction and well-being. Many philosophers have written about the concept of personal authenticity, including Soren Kierkegaard, Martin Heidegger, and Jean-Paul Sartre, but perhaps the best advice comes from the ancient Greek adage, "Know thyself." Students often seek my advice about their career paths. Often they think in terms of market opportunities. Professor Sod, should I study big data analytics? I hear the market is hot for this expertise. As a business school professor, I fully appreciate the importance of identifying and exploiting untapped market niches. But this cannot be the sole means by which one makes crucial educational and career decisions. If you wish to live an existentially authentic life, you must look within and ask which career path is best aligned with your true self. Failure to engage in this calculus is what leads to regret later in life. Market conditions might suggest that it is a good idea to become a chartered accountant. But if your main interest in life is art and architecture, then you might regret spending 40 years as a tax accountant. Notwithstanding the fact that some tax accountants are true artists, and their ability to skirt the tax code legally. When we study regret, we often see that it lies in the discrepancy between one's actual self, tax accountant, an ideal self, architect, or between one's actual self and not self, a feeling that one should be better, more honest, more kindly. It turns out that the most frequent regrets correspond to discrepancies between a person's actual and ideal self. The smaller the discrepancy between your actual and ideal self, the more existentially happy you will be. Being genuine can lead to professional success. I have hosted hundreds of guests on my show. The sad truth, the great majority of whom are highly accomplished individuals. They come from a broad range of backgrounds, jobs, and professions, and they are radically different from one another in countless ways. And yet, the common thread is that they all have interesting things to say, and I am lucky enough to be the host who can orchestrate a fascinating dialogue. I have been successful in this role because I am an authentic person. Being authentic serves as a disarming quality, because it immediately puts the other person at ease. The guests can relax and know that they need not be on psychological guard, for their interlocutor is genuine. Of all my guests, few have been as beguilingly charming as the journalist and attorney Megyn Kelly. During our chat, we were discussing things that we might have regretted in our lives. To her credit, she stated that there were few, if any, things that she regretted because any experience she had, even if it ended badly, allowed her to grow as an individual. Fair enough. I then proceeded to share my regret that my career has been hampered by my inability to compromise my professional principles, actions, or speech for careerist reasons. She replied that my open and frank manner is precisely what made me attractive to so many people. In other words, rather than regretting any elements of my authentic self, I should embrace them, for they have brought me great rewards. Since we are both no-nonsense honey badgers, it is perhaps not surprising that she would appreciate those uncompromising qualities in me. In January 2022, I received an email informing me that His Excellency Ajay Basaria, the High Commissioner of India to Canada, wanted to deliver a personal letter to me from the Honorable Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India. During our phone conversation to discuss my visit to the High Commission of India in Ottawa, Mr. Basaria told me that long ago, he had been accepted to pursue a Ph.D. in marketing at Northwestern University, one of the top departments in the world, but he had chosen instead to pursue a career in the Indian Foreign Service. I asked him whether he ever regretted his decision. His answer was beautiful. He explained that based on his religious beliefs, he does not regret his decision. He believes that which happens was meant to be. Many religions offer such metaphysical solace from the potential angst of regret. The idea that things happen for a reason, or that an outcome is God's will, or that providence guides our fates, is one way to achieve tranquility of the mind. By the way, in case you were wondering about the contents of the letter from Prime Minister Modi to yours truly, I was deeply honored to discover that he wanted to acknowledge my contributions to the world's intellectual life. In the letter, he states, writers and thinkers serve society by pushing the boundaries of thought. In a way, such people are explorers who embark on an adventure of the mind and take others along with them through their power of articulation. There are no limits to what people who know themselves can achieve. Your books and thoughts have helped a number of people understand themselves in their own minds better. Prime Minister Modi was reiterating the importance of the ancient Greek maxim, freedom. Know thyself. I mentioned earlier that I spent 2 years as a visiting associate professor at the University of California at Irvine 2001 through 2003. And was very keen on relocating permanently to Southern California with that objective in mind. I arranged several interviews with local universities during my visit to one. I was told that I could not be granted tenure due to religious considerations, as the school was affiliated with a specific religious denomination. My bewildered revulsion was the epitome of authenticity. I was polite, but did not hide my views on religious tests as part of the hiring process. I thought that I had long ago escaped the religious tribalism of Lebanon. Apparently not. My near-infinite desire to be in Southern California has its limits. I was not about to convert from Judaism to the religious denomination in question. The other university story is even more comical. I had held a very productive meeting with the chair of the department, and toward the end of our conversation, he advised me that part of the hiring process would require that I face the God Squad in order to establish the extent to which I had been active within the religious denomination that supported this university. He explained that I would be coached regarding what to say, to which I retorted that I found it ironic that a religious institution would promote lying as a central feature of the hiring process. Apparently in this case, consequentialist ethics win the day. The chair grinned and corrected me that it was not lying, but coaching, to which I retorted with this nuclear bomb of authenticity. I reminded him that I was an atheist, evolutionist, Lebanese Jew, and as such, it would be a while before I accepted Jesus into my heart as my Lord and Savior. His smile of resignation said it all. I had hit a dead end in my application. My point in sharing these stories is not to shame either school. The hosts were lovely and hospitable, but to highlight the importance of individual dignity, I would rather return to the socialist frozen tundra known as Quebec. Rather than modulate any part of my personal identity, I present myself to the world as is. Take it or leave it. Existential authenticity is a pathway to achieving ataraxia. On becoming a doctor at the age of 91, sometimes regret comes when we think an opportunity has passed us by. But in many cases, opportunity is still available if we pursue it. Just as students frequently ask me about potential career paths, they often ask me about whether they should pursue some new academic journey. Their doubts usually revolve around the question of whether they are too old to embark on a new academic path. It might be that they already have a bachelor's degree in business, but are now keen to acquire a degree in evolutionary psychology. Or it might be a desire to obtain an MBA, but they fear leaving or being distracted from their current job. At times, they are keen to explore acquiring a PhD, but they feel they will be too old by the time that they graduate. In most such instances, the students seeking my advice are in their 20 seconds or 30 seconds. This is what I usually reply. Please sit down and let me tell you a story. I then proceed to recount the incredible anecdote of Dr. Dagobert Bra, who obtained his PhD in history at Concordia University, my university, back in 1996. Bra was born in 1904 in Germany. Because of the rise of the Nazis, Bra, who was Jewish, fled to Canada with his family. Life circumstances did not permit him to pursue his university education, but in his 60s, he decided to enroll in some university classes in what was then called Sir George Williams University, SGWU, a Montreal institution that prided itself on being accommodating to mature, non-traditional students. In 1974, SGWU merged with Loyola College, a Jesuit school also known for supporting mature students, to form what eventually became Concordia University. After completing his bachelor's degree, at a time when most individuals are thinking about retirement, he completed his MA degree in 1985, when he was in his 82nd. But Bro was hardly finished. He went on to complete a PhD in 1996 at the age of 91. He passed away in 1999 after having reached an academic pinnacle. At this point, I usually wait for my students' mouths to close as they are awed by the story, and then playfully ask them, do you still believe that you are too old to pursue your dreams? Bra epitomizes the crucial distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic rewards and how this shapes our life trajectories. When you pursue something for its intrinsic value, you are engaging in an act of purity. For example, if you obtain a degree in discipline X for no other reason than the desire to grow intellectually, you are doing so for intrinsic reasons. If you obtain the degree because it might improve your position in the job market, that is a classic instance of an extrinsic reward. This is a frequent challenge that I face with MBA students, as many enroll in business school largely for extrinsic reasons. Bro knew that he was at the end of his life. He knew that he was not doing a PhD to start a long academic career. He was not pursuing the PhD to impress his parents, his spouse, or his friends. He obtained the PhD for the most noble of reasons, the pure love of knowledge. Manfred Steiner has an equally compelling academic trajectory. He obtained his M.D. in 1955 in Vienna. In 1967, he was awarded a Ph.D. in biochemistry from MIT. After he retired from his medical career in 2000, he began taking physics courses at the undergraduate level, as he had always wanted to be a physicist. This past November, at the age of 89, he defended his Ph.D. dissertation in physics at Brown University, and he is planning on publishing an academic paper based on his doctoral work. Here is Steiner's advice, directed at young people, but really for all of us. I think young people should follow their dreams whatever they are. They will always regret it if they do not follow their dreams. Recently, 2 acquaintances of mine, well into their 50s or 60s, obtained academic degrees. One lady, whom I originally met at our local Italian cafe, is a working artist, who decided to return to Concordia University and pursue a BFA in film animation. This was her second undergraduate degree, and she is now contemplating the possibility of enrolling in an MFA program. The second lady is the partner of a man connected to my family by marriage. She pursued a professional CEGEP, College d'Enseignement, General et Professional, College of General and Professional Studies, degree in Web and Graphic Design. In Quebec, where I reside, we have a unique educational system. High school students graduate in grade 11, and they then head off for a 2-year CEGEP degree, which is a transitory degree toward being admitted to an undergraduate program in a university. It is similar to a community college in the American context. CEGEP students are typically in their late teens, whereas the typical BFA students are perhaps in their early 20s. In other words, these two lifelong learners were old enough to be the grandmothers of their class cohorts, and yet this did not dissuade them from achieving their educational goals. The same can-do attitude applies to individuals who enroll in medical school after the age of 40. While they constitute a small minority, less than 1% within a 20-year period, they are sufficiently large in number to support the notion that it is truly never too late to pursue some dreams and avoid future regret. Of note, a meta-analysis of the most common life regrets revealed that education was the most frequent one, yielding 32% of stated regrets, covering the gamut from "I regret that I obtained a degree in this field" to "I regret that I was not more studious" to "I regret that I never obtained my degree." As should be evident by now, it is seldom too late to assuage education-related regrets. While it may never be too late to pursue a medical career, Amy Wax did the opposite. She walked away from being a neurologist to pursue a career in law. Well-timed career switches can be just as crucial to avoiding future regret. Amy obtained a BS in molecular biophysics and biochemistry from Yale University. She was then a Marshall Scholar in philosophy, physiology, and psychology at Oxford University. This was followed by an MD degree at Harvard University. She then completed a residency in neurology and became a consulting neurologist. This is an arduous educational path, and yet Dr. Wax decided to walk away from medicine. At the same time as she became a practicing neurologist, she had graduated with a JD degree from Columbia University. She held several legal positions: law clerk to a U.S. Court of Appeals judge, assistant to the U.S. Solicitor General, and then landed a professorship of law at the University of Pennsylvania. Amy and I held a chat on my show where we briefly discussed her incredible career switch. Despite being a neurologist, she had the courage to switch careers to maximize her occupational happiness. This is the hallmark of a true honey badger, which is further solidified in Amy's case, in that she has been fearless and implacable in speaking her mind throughout her academic career. Despite several attempts to get her cancelled, she has been a dogged anti-woke professor, unwilling to cave to the perpetually offended campus mobs. One of my favorite television shows from my childhood back in the 1970s was Three's Company. Via the magic of syndication, my young children were recently introduced to Three's Company, and it has been a delight for me to experience the show so many years later through their eyes. Even sitcoms can teach life lessons. In one episode that I rewatched recently, one of the lead characters, Janet, played by Joyce DeWitt, is temporarily excited after a dance instructor encourages her to think she could pursue a career as a dancer. He has, of course, ulterior lecherous motives, but the point of the story comes when Janet realizes that she is in fact too old and insufficiently talented to be a professional dancer. The life lesson here is that while it may never be too late to pursue certain dreams, one also needs to be grounded in reality. The "you can be anything if you set your mind to it" mantra is inspiring, but at times illusory. The value of anticipatory regret. Regret is considered a negative emotion, but it is also an emotion one learns from, and that can lead to better future behaviors. In contrast to 8 other negative emotions: anger, fear, sadness, disappointment, guilt, anxiety, jealousy, and boredom, regret was viewed most positively, and of the 9 examined negative emotions, regret was construed as possessing the most functional value. Many entrepreneurs in particular recognize the functional value of anticipatory regret, to which I turn next. As of September 2020, Amazon's market capitalization was $1.761 trillion. Its founder, Jeff Bezos, was the world's wealthiest individual with a net worth of $201.3 billion. Amazon might have never been founded were it not for the fact that Bezos did not wish to experience future regret at not having taken a shot at starting the company. In a 2001 interview, he stated, "I wanted to project myself forward at age 80 and say, okay, now I'm looking back on my life. I want to have minimized the number of regrets I have. And you know, I knew that when I was 80, I was not going to regret having tried this. I was not going to regret trying to participate in this thing called the internet that I thought was going to be a really big deal. I knew that if I failed, I wouldn't regret that. But I knew the one thing I might regret is not ever having tried. And I knew that that would haunt me every day." This is what Bezos referred to as his regret minimization framework. It is a very powerful mindset to compel people to go for it. Bezos' mental model is also known as anticipatory regret. In other words, it is forward-looking. It involves acting now to avoid what you might anticipate as a later regret. Anthony Robbins is one of the most successful self-help gurus and life coaches. He has sold millions of books and lectured to innumerable people and companies in a career that has spanned well over 3 decades. Irrespective of whether one agrees with the entirety of his methods and teachings, he has been an undeniable dispenser of well-received advice. When asked about the fear of failure in a 2016 interview, he stated, "The easiest way to deal with the fear of failure is to be more fearful of not taking action." In the interview, Robbins refers to his rocking chair test, not wanting to be 85 years old, sitting on a rocking chair, and regretting the things that he did not tackle out of fear, trepidation, or other potential obstacles. A good life might be measured by how easily you sit in your rocking chair. At age 85, reading good books rather than wallowing over lost opportunities. Some forms of regret are functional, and some might be inevitable because of circumstances and choices, but others serve no purpose and are utterly unnecessary. One of the rare occasions that my father visited my wife and me at our home highlights an example of poorly calibrated regret. My dad and I were sitting in the living room, and after a pensive pause, he said, "You know, Gad, I deeply regret that we did not send you to Jewish school." It was uttered in a judgmental tone. I paused in turn and said, "You know, Dad, that which you regret most about me is what I have most to thank you for. Having been educated in non-Jewish schools allowed me to interact with a broad range of folks that I would otherwise have been insulated from." He was not pleased with my response. If you are going to regret something, at least make sure it is worth it. His regret was no regret of mine, and he should have let it go. We each have to live our own lives. Do not regret your lost youth. Age gracefully. Polina Porizkova was one of the best-known supermodels of the 1980s. She married Rico Kasich, the lead singer of The Cars, a successful band popular in the 1980s. He was nearly 20 years her senior when they married. But it is not unusual for older successful men to wed beautiful younger women. Porizkova was interviewed recently by the Times of London. She lamented that men no longer show her much attention. Her husband passed away in 2019. She stated, "I am now completely invisible. I walk into a party, I try to flirt with guys and they just walk away from me to pursue someone 20 years younger. I'm very single, I'm dressed up, I've made an effort. Nothing." I decided to reply to her, since many women share her sentiments, shocked at how they no longer hold the same sexual sway over men as they did in their younger years. Here was my response, which I thought was measured and respectful. I told her that she was hardly invisible, but the fact that you do not have the same pull for some men is to be expected. I'm sure that innumerable men have been invisible to you as they approached you in your life. It's called reality. Dynamics change through life stages. Rather than take stock of the important life lesson that I was sharing with her, she decided to retort in the following snarky and rude manner. "Sounds like you speak from experience. I guess the hot babes weren't interested in you, huh?" This led me to reply, "This is an unbecoming response of a serious adult. You are stuck in your irreverent, sassy, narcissistic teenage years, but your birth certificate says otherwise. Stay classy. Oh, by the way, my wife is very beautiful on the inside and outside. Be well." I then proceeded to release a said truth clip, wherein I analyzed the psychological fallacies implicit in her bitterness. When another individual tried to explain to her the grandmother hypothesis, which provides an evolutionary explanation for why women live long after the end of their fertility, because they then become childcare help as grandmothers, Porizkova responded angrily, "Seems like evolution is serving only one section of the population." Her implication was that evolution was inherently sexist. I replied, "Zero understanding of evolution. For most species, including humans, female mate choice shapes the evolutionary trajectory of male morphology and male behavior. It's called sexual selection. It's also called science and a fact of life." Porizkova's bitterness, which stems from the idea pathogen known as militant feminism, is an impediment to her leading a happy life, as evidenced in her Twitter bio that contained the following line, "America, you made me a feminist." Based on the furious responses I received from women after my exchanges with Porizkova, this is a deep source of age-related bitterness. Many women lament that their sexual power has an expiration date, and blame the evil patriarchy for teaching men to prefer younger women. Well, we all have an expiration date. The speed and grace that I had when I was a 17-year-old soccer player and could dribble past 4 or 5 opponents with explosive acceleration was missing when I tried to play against my son's soccer team and realized that 10-year-olds could now run faster than me. I did not postulate that the evil matriarchy was keeping me down, but recognized that I had aged. Male prizefighters are typically not octogenarians, nor are football players. With the exception of Tom Brady, of course. Men's sexual vigor is not the same when they are 60 as compared to when they were 21. But older men can compensate for that because of what women look for in a husband. Women around the world desire men with high social status. And not surprisingly, men's social status typically increases with age. Men around the world desire young, nubile, and beautiful women. And physical attributes, alas, fade with age. These sex-specific mating preferences are not due to the machinations of the evil patriarchy, but are firmly rooted in evolutionary processes. Women's sexual pull on the mating market reaches its zenith when they are younger, that of men when they are older. This is called biology and has nothing to do with sexism. In the words of Christopher Walken in the 2005 film Wedding Crashers, nature always wins. When you live your life wedded to reality, rather than to bitter self-deception rooted in corrosive idea pathogens, in this case, militant feminism, it permits you to have ataraxia. Failure to do so causes you to direct unnecessary angst and resentment at a unicorn enemy known as the patriarchy. The regret of lost experiences. When I was a visiting professor at the University of California at Irvine, one of my favorite activities was to scour the numerous extraordinary second-hand bookstores in Southern California, accompanied by my wife. I felt like a book archaeologist digging through mounds of dirt to uncover the rare jewel. As I type these words, I long for that feeling of elation and happiness that I experience browsing through the endless aisles of knowledge. Regrettably, most of these bookstores, most notably Acres of Books in Long Beach, California, literally a warehouse of books covering an entire street block, eventually folded in large part due to the powers of Amazon. Was my book hunting a pursuit of material goods, or of experiences? After all, I was purchasing tangible goods that would be added to my personal library. But of course, this was greatly overshadowed by the magical experiences both of finding these books and then reading them. This brings me to a very important distinction between two competing drivers of happiness. Are we happier when we collect material possessions, or when we amass enriching life experiences? It might at first sound obvious that the latter should be the correct response, and yet as a consumer psychologist, I can assure you that the materialism trap is all too real for millions of people. Consumers will go into great debt to purchase a car that they cannot afford, a house for which they can barely cover the mortgage, or a boat that they are likely to use only 3 times during the summer season. And yet, most research shows that to spend money on life experiences, like a trip around the world, increases an individual's happiness more than spending money on material possessions, like a luxury car. This is consistent with a study that examined the links between various forms of consumption: leisure, personal care, food, healthcare, vehicles, and housing on happiness. Only leisure consumption, consuming life experiences, was correlated with happiness. The fact that the consumption of experiences brings us much greater happiness than the purchase of material goods carries over to our regret calculus. Few people, when looking back on their lives, will rue the lost opportunity of not having purchased a Rolex, a Mercedes, or a Hugo Boss suit. But innumerable people will regret not having visited Paris, not having taken the safari to Namibia, or not having learned how to sail across the Caribbean Sea. This was perfectly captured in a recent Expedia commercial that aired during Super Bowl 56. The narrator, actor Ewan McGregor, says, "We love stuff, and there's some really great stuff out there. But I doubt that any of us will look back on our lives and think, I wish I had bought an even thinner TV, found a lighter light beer, or had an even smarter smartphone." Do you think any of us will look back in our lives and regret the things we didn't buy, or the places we didn't go? Spot on. Live your life according to that Expedia motto. The winner at life is the one who collects the greatest number of enriching life experiences, not the one who owns more stuff. Notwithstanding that when it comes to our happiness, experiences offer us more bang for the buck than material possessions, there remains an important issue to resolve. Experiences are greatly varied. For example, the prescription to stop and smell the roses is centered in the here and now, such that we ought to maximally enjoy the simple pleasures of life. On the other hand, contemporary colloquialisms such as YOLO, you only live once, and FOMO, fear of missing out, capture the drive to pursue grand experiences. Enjoying a great cup of coffee whilst listening to a great book, as I hope you are doing right now, might be an example of metaphorically stopping and smelling the roses, whereas signing up for that bungee jump in Queenstown, New Zealand, is best captured by the YOLO and RFOMO ethos. Are our lives better lived if they are composed of ordinary or extraordinary experiences? Of course, as we've seen, variety matters. We should seek an optimal combination of both types of experiences. It turns out, though, that the extent to which we prefer one type of experience over the other is a function of our age. In our youth, we prefer extraordinary experiences over ordinary ones. As we age, both experiences are equally valued. Regret is an aversive emotion that can gnaw away at our happiness, especially on matters that we cannot retroactively fix, such as marital infidelity leading to divorce. It can, however, also be a useful warning sign to compel us to engage in corrective behavior. In 1999, Barry Kadish set up the website Regretsonly.com, where individuals could submit their stories of regret. The project proved so successful that he decided to quit his job as an advertising man and focus on writing a book on regret. This book, published in 2001, was titled Damn: Reflections on Life's Biggest Regrets. His conclusion, perfectly in line with the scientific findings on regret, was, most people regret the things they don't do more than the things they do. If you don't try, you're always going to be left with that nagging question, what if? I didn't want to look back and say, I should have done this. In his 2022 book, The Power of Regret, Daniel Pink posits that many regrets stem from failures of boldness. I should have been bold and quit my secure job and started my dream business. Again, this demonstrates that many of our deepest regrets come from inactions that leave us pursuing inauthentic lives. Don't do that. Instead, remember the words of the poet William Ernest Henley, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.